Tubers, tubettes, and of course my colorful collection of crazy people. I normally don't do an intro video to a video, but I felt that this one warranted it. The reason why is that the topic is going to be black and white in America, racism. And why am I talking about something that's going on in America when I'm living here in the Philippines, and especially this type of topic? Well, the reason being is that as I have been meeting with people and talking with them, I ask them their reasons for moving over here. And as always, I get the usual suspects like, well, the economics of it, or I'm meeting somebody, or I needed a change, and blah, blah, blah. But I'm also hearing from them that they're really upset about how in the last 4, 5, 6 years, how the topography and the dynamics between people, in many cases between blacks and whites, has changed in America. The gentleman that I'm going to be talking to and interviewing and having a conversation with has been or was married for 37 years to a black woman. And that came up out of about a 2.5-hour conversation that him and I had 48 hours ago. During the course of the conversation, when he mentioned that he was married to a black woman, I asked him a question just out of the blue. I said, hey man, in your opinion, since you were in the culture, who's more racist, white people or black people? And without hesitation, he said black people. And so that conversation is coming forward. I would also be remiss if I didn't say here, because I said it at the end of the video. The video is very long. I know most of you will make it to the end of it. You may not make it past this. However, if you are a person of color and you have either an opposing viewpoint, a concurring viewpoint, or someplace in between, I want to make sure that there is an open forum here on my channel if you would like to appear on it, and I would like to hear from you. All right, so here is the conversation / interview with my guest about racism in America. Okay, so real briefly, introduce yourself and we will get this conversation rolling.
All righty, great. Thanks, Paul.
My pleasure.
The introduction that I'm going to use today pertains to the topic we're going to talk about. So we're going to be talking about racial issues, black, white. So I want to give you my bona fides before I talk about any of the details. Let's start off with my childhood. I was raised in the 50s as a kid, in the 60s as a teenager by a single woman. So that has implications because of the poverty that I lived in and the issue of single mother parenting. By the time I was 17, 18, I was all things that you would expect out of that environment. Now, I grew up in the projects. Well, that's not true. When the projects were built, we were living in a trailer trash environment and waiting for them to get built so we could move in. So that's my kind of background. Now, at 17, I was a juvenile delinquent. I'd been in and out of juvenile hall, arrested for things. My friends were all arrested, and I was on my way to county jail. Not for a particular crime, but I knew I was going to commit that crime in the next year or so.
Okay.
That was the track I was on. So that's one significant piece, and you'll see how that plays in as we talk. The other thing that makes me qualified to talk about this, there's two more. One is that I'm a retired corrections officer out of the state of California. As a corrections officer, that means I worked in the prisons. I worked both in the juvenile system, so we had kids from 15 to up to 22, and then in the adult system, which is young men from 18 on up to death, in their 60s and 70s. So I've been in and out of that correction system. I was also a parole agent on the streets of Los Angeles. So I have a real first-hand experience dealing with the criminal elements. We'll be talking about how that plays into the culture and the relationships of black and white. Also the Hispanics in Southern California. And the last piece, which gives me a unique perspective, I think, out of everybody who has those two things in common, is that I was married to a black woman, a wonderful woman. Let me make this point. She's a wonderful woman, still is, great lady, for 37 years. So that's not nothing. That's a lot of time, a lot of experience. For most of my adult life, I was often the only white person, much less the only white man in the building. So that's a little bit of background. Now, I've also spent time in the military, and I'm college educated, which is an anomaly given where I came from, and that's important.
So you and I met day before yesterday for
Yes.
the first time.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to know more about his backstory, it is on Mark Thornton's channel, Every Man Has His Story.
Right.
But we're going to go in a totally different direction.
Yes.
Because you and I had about a 2.5 hour conversation.
Time went fast, but it's
yeah,
long, yeah.
It went by like in
Yeah.
15 minutes to me.
Yeah.
And we were talking, and just in casual conversation, I was asked if you were married, and you said, yeah, and you just I was married to a black woman, and then you moved on, and we talked about other topics, so that wasn't like what was on the table at all. And then me being me, I said, so how long were you married to this black woman? He said 37 years. And I said, I have a question for you. I said, and I'm going to re-ask you the question, okay? And you can just answer it the way you answered it. Who is more of a racist, black people or white people?
And the short answer, in today's environment in America, black people are far more, as a group, now we've got to, all the disclaimers about people who are on the other end, all blah, blah, blah. But as a group, black people are far, not just some, but far more racist than white people.
Now, I feel comfortable that coming from you, because as opposed to a guy like me that has had no or limited exposure to the black culture. I worked with black guys and Mexican guys and Iranian guys and this and that and the other, but we were in a work environment.
Right.
We didn't particularly hang out, or we weren't disagreeable. We just worked at a work. You, on the other hand, have actually lived in the black culture
I have.
for an excess of 30 years. Where do you come up with the conclusion that blacks are more racist against whites than whites are against blacks?
Okay, very good way to frame that. There's several ways that I would say how I've come to that conclusion. One is in the culture, in the black culture. I think I mentioned this yesterday. You get 3 black people together for 3 minutes, and you will have, if you're listening carefully, you will have heard some reference to white people in a negative manner. Now, it can be very, very, very slight. It may be simply somebody will do this. They'll rub the top of their hand. Well, what that means when they do that is that they're pointing out the fact that their skin color is black.
Okay.
And that has held them back somehow. So they won't actually say it, but they said it.
Okay. To each other.
To each other, yes.
Okay.
Not to me, but to each other. Now you go into the culture of that, and you look at, it's endemic that the conversation. Let me give you an example of a result. Last year, a couple of years ago, I was in the back seat of my niece's car, and my wife's niece.
Okay.
She was giving us a ride from the airport, and we're just rolling along. And she said something, I don't have any idea what it was, but it was blatantly racist against white people. Now, here's a 35-year-old woman. She's college educated.
Okay.
She's a happy person.
Okay.
She owns her own business.
Okay.
She's driving a nice car. She's doing well in life. She was raised in the church. Her mother is a middle manager in a large corporation, makes good money. Her father is a minister in a church.
Okay.
He's not the senior minister, but he's one of the ministers in a church. That gives you a sense of who we're talking about here. We're not talking about my neighbors when I was a kid.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Joe Gangbanger.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay. She made this overtly racist comment. And I'm sitting in the back seat, so I flipped the comment to flip it around. She looked at me like I was crazy. Uncle Jay, you're crazy. She didn't even hear that she had said an overtly racist comment. Now, I was still married at the time, so actually it goes back a few years, and my wife, who was sitting in the front seat, completely stiffened because she knew that I had been offended. She understood it. She had heard it. She had seen me, object to this time and time and time again. So here is somebody who's really on the up and up, doing well, but her language is so deep. Now, you hear in the black culture all the time. Now, there's arguments on both sides of this, but you'll hear many people, many black people, Americans, will say, we can't be racist. That's an actual belief in the culture. We can't be racist.
I never heard that before.
Well, spend some time in the culture.
Okay.
You'll hear it. And then the people like my ex-wife would say, are you crazy? Of course you can be racist. How do you feel about Mexicans? Because there's a big difference between them and Mexicans
Is there?
as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I can't speak to the Mexican side. I don't have that experience.
Right.
But yeah, the blacks don't like the Mexicans, but they hate us. They hate, in general, speaking generally, the blacks have an active animosity towards the whites. They have a dislike for the Mexicans.
Yeah, I had mentioned over a month ago on video, and we were talking about this, that I thought in the 80s a lot of this was in our rearview mirror, that it would come to, we had come to sort of a kumbaya moment there with Michael Jackson and Bruce Springsteen and We Are the World and Coke commercials. And while we certainly can't ignore what happened in the past, I can tell you quite frankly, as a white guy, I'm a little tired of getting blamed for something that somebody that was my skin color did 100 years ago or whatever. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I totally acknowledge it. It totally disgusts me. It should never have happened. It's been going on for thousands of years, by the way. Whites have been held as slaves. Blacks have been held as slaves. Yeah. Any skin color, ethnicity, religion has been slaved at some point in time in history.
Right.
So I'm just wondering why this is so endemic right now. Why has it become such a hot topic recently? It just seems like, here's the example. I don't know if we touched on this or not, but there's been horrifically a lot of police shootings where white police officers, in my mind as I watch the video, improperly shot and killed or choked or whatever a man of color. Horrible. Shouldn't happen.
Right.
And then it happens again, and then it happens again, and it happens again. And I thought to myself as I was watching TV, do you guys never shoot white people? Because I never see it on TV. But you had an answer to that.
I did.
What's the stats that you have on that?
Well, I went back and looked at it because we'd had that conversation. I didn't want to just throw out numbers that I had randomly heard. And so I looked it up. So actually I have it here in my pocket. I'm going to point out. And the stats, what was it? Golly, I can't think of who the guy was back when. One of the famous writers, he said that numbers don't lie, but liars use numbers.
Liars always figure. Liars don't always figure, but figures never lie.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Anyway, the point is that you can throw out some good stats and make it read this way or read that way. And I checked out some numbers this morning on the internet, and I was watching a YouTube video that absolutely laid into that. So here are some numbers. Now, understand we need to pull these apart just a little bit.
Please do.
Okay, so shot dead in 2022. So this is the most current full year. So this is now, right? There are 313 black people, black men. I guess it didn't separate out. So black people, 313, predominantly men, I'm sure, shot and killed by the police.
313.
216 Hispanics.
Okay.
502 white.
Shot by the police.
Killed by the police.
So, according to your number, almost 200 more white people have been shot and killed by the police.
Yes.
Why don't I see that on TV?
Well, back to the culture.
Okay.
And let's go back to the video that I watched this morning. And they proclaimed loudly that 3 times the number of black people are killed by the police than whites.
Okay.
So how can they say that when it's maybe 40% as many, not 3 times as many? Well, if you go back and look at another piece of this, and you say, all right, how many black people are there in the population. So 13% of America's population is black.
Okay.
60%, 61% of the population is white.
Okay.
So proportionately, there are a lot more black people getting killed proportionally than white people.
Okay.
Okay, so stop there, film your video, put it up, and see how horrible it is. And you can make these kinds of inciting statements. All right. So let's take a look at this. Let's go to look at men in prison.
Okay.
Now, I was a prison counselor. I was a youth prison counselor. I was a parole agent. Okay, so I was in that environment. And now as a counselor, I dealt with these guys. I dealt with their personal lives. I dealt with what's going on.
Yes.
It wasn't just the guard up on the tower.
Okay.
So I'm in with these people.
Okay. All right.
So dealing with in California, 34% of men inmates are black. 24% are Hispanic, 29% are white. So proportionally, again, you have a higher disproportion of blacks in prison. They're the highest number, 34.
They are.
Black, white, 34 to 29.
Yes, they are.
Okay, so they're 5% more, but there's only 13% of them in the population.
So that's really disproportionate.
Very much so, yes. Now, if you dig into this a little further, oh, by the way, just one quickie. On the female side, and I actually have experience with it because when I worked with the prison system, I was at one point, for about 2 years, I worked in a prison that had a female side and a male side. And so I worked on both sides as a counselor. So I've been there. But 47% of female prisoners are white. Only 18% of female prisoners are black.
Really?
Yeah. Now, that's something we can dig into a little bit later if you'd like to.
Oh, no, I was married to a few of those psychos.
Exactly.
They should all be in prison. I rest my case. Okay, all my previous videos have just been proven true. Thank you very much. Let's just stop here while I'm way ahead. I got 2 more for him.
And I can rest. I can join you on that because the black woman who I was married to should never go to prison. She's a wonderful person, so she would be the one that stayed out.
Let me ask you this:
Yes.
Is there racial profiling? Do the cops go out and if they see me driving by, an old gray-haired man, are they less likely to stop me than if I'm a 20-year-old black man with my music up loud?
Driving while black, right?
Yeah.
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Okay.
No doubt about it.
Okay.
Of
So
course.
work needs to be done
Yes.
with the police.
And not only the police though. Let's take a look at the culture.
Please.
Okay. Now, I'm going to give you 3 pieces here, and I'm just going off the top of my head, but I remember it fairly well. A black man arrested for the same thing as a white man is arrested as the same thing for a woman. So you get 3 people arrested for the same violent crime.
Okay.
Okay, so it's a major crime.
Okay.
It's not he broke the window next door.
No, it's an assault.
It's an assault. It's aggravated, whatever.
Right.
We used a gun.
Okay.
Okay, the black man will get 10 years.
Uh-huh.
The white man will get 7 to 8 years.
Uh-huh.
The woman will get 1 to 2. For the same crime, same amount of damage, same amount of everything. So there's a disparity.
Yes, there is.
In the judgment.
Uh-huh.
We can't. I want to be fair about this.
Well, that's the whole point. Truth is good.
Yeah, truth is good. So does that mean that there's a problem?
Facts and statistics are good.
Yeah. Now I'm using those numbers just by memory.
Okay.
So it could vary a little bit, but the idea is there. Black men get sentenced longer than white men. Women get sentenced to like 20-25% of what men get sentenced for the exact same crime. You can eat your children and get away with it if you're a woman.
Not amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just leave that aside, but I wanted to use that as kind of a credibility factor in making this statement about that. So is there racial profiling? Of course there is. Let's take a look at where that comes from, though.
Okay.
That's a real big deal. Now,
because if I can interrupt.
shoot, please.
It sounds to me like, as we start off here, and we'll bring it back full circle to the racism in the black culture towards white people. But it seems to me that with these statistics that I'm hearing, we're putting a few bullets in the holster of black America to have the feelings that they have. When they get incarcerated, they are going to get incarcerated for a longer period of time. When there's a traffic stop, they're more likely to get pulled over. I can see, taking their side there, that why they would feel that resentment. Okay, so I got to give credit where credit is due.
Sure.
How do you feel about that? Does that fit in with what you were talking about before?
It's a good partial answer.
Okay.
Okay. It's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
But if I had to say yes or no, I would say yes. I agree with you.
Okay.
And if we could, stop the camera here, that's what we would leave it at that. So
Okay.
yes, that's
But let's
true.
not. Let's
Yeah.
get into it.
Okay, let's get into it. Alrighty. Now, when we look at the prison numbers, and so let's discount. Let's say that there's some of those guys who wouldn't have gone to prison or staying longer. Let's discount that. But then we look at the actual crimes and the neighborhoods. Now remember, I grew up in the projects. Okay, when we were lucky. Okay, I moved around a lot, so weren't always able to get in. That meant I lived in the bad neighborhood. Kind of put that together. Okay?
I'm with you.
So back in the 50s and 60s, a single mom made no money, and welfare wasn't what it is today. My mother didn't take welfare, so we were at the bottom end, and so I was always the minority in that environment. And sometimes I would have a friend who lived in a better neighborhood, and it was not crime-ridden. That's important. Now, where I lived, it was overwhelmingly non-white. Where my friend lived, it was overwhelmingly white.
Okay.
One area was crime-ridden. You were afraid to go out at night.
Okay.
And another area, you didn't even think it was not. What do you mean? We're just going to go to the store. It was just an automatic. You just went out.
I'm going to 7-Eleven.
Yeah, exactly. So as a kid, I knew you didn't do that because you would
Now,
get
were
hurt.
you accepted in the neighborhood because you were from the neighborhood, or did you stick out and were you picked on? Were you singled out? Were you ostracized?
I was generally ignored.
Ignored. Okay.
I don't have, as a kid, in my particular.
Did you feel threatened at any point in time because of your skin color being in that neighborhood?
Absolutely, yes.
You did?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
And did you ever incur any wrath, or did you ever take a beating that you didn't feel you deserved, or anything like that?
When I was, what was I, 7th grade, I got jumped and beat up pretty badly.
Okay. Because of your skin color?
Because of my skin color, right.
Okay.
And then again, when I was, what was I, 1995, something like that. So I'm an adult, right? My wife and I had moved to a small town in central Texas, and we bought her mother a home, and we refurbed it and got it done for her. She had rented the house. She really liked it. She retired. We bought it and rebuilt it. And then we looking and said, hey, there's a lot of these houses that we could buy very, very cheap and redo them and sell them back into the community, kind of build this community. And you talked about the 1980s. I had that 1980s kumbaya kind of attitude. I was married to a black woman. Let's do some social good here. And in the neighborhood where I was rebuilding homes, and by the way, when I sold them, I didn't make any money. I was already retired. I have a retirement early, so I didn't need the money. We were doing this kind of as our ministry, if you want to call it that.
Copy that.
Okay. And so I was taking everything out of my pocket, building these houses, selling them cheap, just enough to pay off what I had into it. I was on my bicycle going from one work site to the next. I got assaulted because I was white in the community. So I have been jumped and beat up as a kid, 12, 13 years old.
Okay.
And then as a full-grown adult, living in the community. It was a block away from where I lived. I was living in that community at my mother-in-law's home. We were all living in this one house while we were temporarily rebuilding these things. And I was assaulted again. And many times, if I would pull into a driveway to say, just to turn my car around or something,
Right.
the guy would step out the door and say, get the F out of here.
Really?
Yeah. Very actively racism in that community in a small town in Central Texas.
So racism is a major problem in America.
It
and
is.
your conclusion is that the blacks are more racist than whites.
Yes.
I've got to agree with you because I feel that every time a white person, not every time, but so often when a white person does something, it's interpreted as racist or whatnot. And I'm thinking, no, it's not.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm not doing anything wrong. Hell, I'm married to an Asian.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, I don't know, a white-only guy.
Yeah.
What was it like when you went to your wife's family's house for dinner?
They were congenial.
Okay.
Some of them liked me.
Okay.
Some of them didn't like me, and that's going to happen. That's the normal dynamic
Sure.
of family, right?
Yeah.
But the ones who didn't like me, let me rephrase that. There were those who wanted me to be there because I was a white guy, and there was a preponderance of the group, let's say 60-40, who wanted me out of the house because I was white.
Wow.
And now, after a few years, I mean, this is 37 years, so it doesn't just happen, one day.
No, that's why you're qualified to talk about it.
Over the years, actually over the decades, it became more and more evident that I was an embarrassment.
Really?
Yes.
On your skin color, based on
Yes.
your skin color.
For example,
had you have been black, that would not have happened.
Absolutely not. No. So let's say we're at a Thanksgiving dinner or a Christmas dinner or a wedding, whatever, right? I'm the only white person there. But you're not just family here, so it's a lot of other people. And in the black community, they tend to have a lot of relationships and friends, so whoever's doing well will put on a party, and a lot of people will come. That's one of the wonderful things about that community, is this tightness of the community. But there's always, let's say you've got a group of 20, 30 people, right? There's always 2 or 3, typically men, but not always, who will start making overt racial comments within earshot.
Gotcha.
Now, in the 37 years that I was there, I can tell you, I cannot tell you how many hundreds of times that happened, but I can tell you not one time, not a single time did anybody back them down.
Even your wife?
Even my wife.
Why do you think that is?
Because the feedback that they would get, the response would be so vehement, that person would jump up and call her all kinds of bad names and bad races, and anybody who stood up for me.
Really?
Yeah. And it doesn't, now I said her, but let's back up, because my sister-in-law's husband is a minister. His church has made the statement they want to get white people in their church. They don't have any, but they want to. They want to get over this. And I think that's a thing that we should explore as well, if not you and I, but certainly the culture. There are people who want to get over it. And he dared not, in his own home, stop these guys and back them down.
Wow.
Because if he said something to the man who said that, 20 out of 21 people would jump on him.
Okay, it leads me to my next question. You put 100 black guys in a room. How many of them really have an attitude towards blame whatever's wrong with their life on white people, the color of their skin, and how many of them have progressed past that or have a different attitude? In other words, okay, please.
Great question. First of all, I'm going to rephrase the answer or the question, because rather than 100 black men, let's say it's 50 shades of gray of 100 black men.
Okay.
Not complexion. 50 shades of gray in that continuum between it's all the white man's fault and who are we talking about, right?
Yeah.
So, and generally speaking, you can put parental background and educational background and lay that in. The higher up the scale, the less racist their parents were.
Okay.
And the more education they have, which means that with education, that means they're generally going to be working in a place where there's more white people. instead of in a place where there's
So there's more
white people.
exposure to white guys.
Absolutely, right.
And they find that, hey, you're not such a bad dude.
Exactly, right.
Where if you're never out of the neighborhood,
Right.
and you're always in the same culture,
Right.
and you never go more than 6 miles from home, and all you see is the news,
Yeah.
and all you're listening to are all your friends,
Right.
and you don't know a person as a human being,
Right.
then yeah, they are the enemy.
They are the
because
enemy,
you've
exactly.
been told that since the day you were born,
Right.
and it's just part of the culture. Now let me ask you another question. Let me flip it around. We're going to put 100 white guys in a locker room, okay? And how many of those guys are going to use the N-word? Or how many of those guys are you going to say are total racists, that people of color are beneath them?
2 or 3.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
I would-
And they're
I would
genuine
agree with
racists.
that.
I mean, they're
Yeah, they're dyed-in-the-wool. That's
dying-the-wool
it.
jerks, yeah.
Yeah.
And they're going to hate anybody who's not them.
Yeah.
They're going to hate the Jews. They're going to hate the Mexicans. They're going to hate, they're going to hate everybody who's not them.
Yeah. It's interesting because I work with so many multitudes of ethnicity through my life, and I never really saw people of color as people of color. I just never did.
Then you're blessed.
And it was just, he was either a dick or he was a nice guy. It was kind of where I cut it,
Yeah,
And I knew some black guys that were just hysterical.
Yep.
And they would go into this whole kind of like black humor.
Yeah,
But it
yeah,
was, I loved it, because
yeah.
it was new and it was exciting and it was funny and it was they were just cool, funny, cool people. And they loved everybody too.
Yes.
And
they're great guys.
Great guys.
Yeah.
What do you think is the future of this? Because like I said, I felt like it got toned down in the 80s. I felt that it's been reamped. I think there's money being made off of it by the division. We were talking about guys like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton, who I think stoke the fires because it enriches them. It allows them to get money. And by creating the turmoil, they are getting millions of dollars. Where's your take on that?
You've asked 2 questions. I want to get both of those. And you mentioned Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson. Let's take a real quick look at the money. And it's not answering the more important question, but it is
okay.
one of those. And Black Lives Matter is a big deal. It's been out, right? It raised tens of millions of dollars. Now, if I were to ask you, who started Black Lives Matter and why?
I wouldn't have a clue.
Exactly. And I wouldn't have either until I finally looked it up. And I heard somebody talking about it who was a men's rights activist of all things. He was talking about it. He said, oh, this has nothing to do with it. Now, he said, I'm not saying this, he said, and then I looked it up. He said that, oh, yeah, it had nothing to do with that. The 3 women that did it, they have a nonprofit, has nothing to do with crime, etc. And it's a very feminist, lesbian, pro-lesbian environment. Okay, so I looked it up. 2 of the 3 women are avowed lesbians married to a woman. 1 woman is very private. It's thought that she's married to a man, but that's all they know. So very private woman. So good for her. They're all college educated. Now the woman that was the basis of this, by the way, they have a website. It's about not domestic violence, don't hear that, about domestic workers. So the kind of helping domestic workers, nominally a good thing. We know that domestic workers is predominantly female. Okay, so that's their deal. They're making tens of millions, something like 60 or 80 million dollars on the Black Lives Matter, what they received. Now, it's been dispersed, or what have you, but we're talking real money here.
Yeah, we're talking real money.
And now the woman who's in charge of this thing, her net worth, personal, is $5 million. She owns a house that's worth $8 million. I'm not saying she's done anything wrong with any of the money. I'm just saying we're talking about people who are at the level of making money. And they're the ones that started Black Lives Matter. They predominantly deal with women. 2 of them are lesbian and focused on that. I'm speaking hearsay. I'm should be shamed for this, but I've heard that their politics are extremely racist. I don't know that, but that's just what I've heard. and I didn't have time to dig into their statements in politics to say that's true. So I'm not repeating it, I'm just telling you what I've heard. It wouldn't surprise me because they started the Black Lives Matter movement. And
Hasn't that petered out?
largely,
I mean, my initial thing about Black Lives Matter was due to police brutality.
Yeah.
And I think that was, to me, that's the origin of it.
It was,
It
yes.
was because I can't remember the names. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And there was a slew
Yes.
of
young kid
brutal
got shot
stuff going
without a
on.
gun, what have you.
And I can't tell you that I didn't watch them and say, man, that's wrong.
Yes.
You know, those
Yeah.
cops are wrong.
They were wrong.
And
Yeah.
the fact that they were white, but what I was watching that a young white woman the other day drove into the wrong driveway and was shot by a white guy and killed. Okay, so she was taken down by a gun. It wasn't a cop. There was a black kid that knocked on the wrong door. An 84 and an 86-year-old white man shot him because he thought the kid was breaking in, or that was his excuse. He's been charged. There was a march for the black kid. There was no march for the white woman.
Right.
Same circumstances.
Right.
In the wrong place at the wrong time, at someone's front door, met with a gun. The kid was fortunately not killed.
Good.
The black kid was fortunately not killed. The 21 or 22-year-old college cheerleader, white woman, was killed. And yet there's this outcry with the boy, the young man, and absolutely nothing about the woman. In other words, there's no one picking up picket signs and marching. What's that dynamic about?
That's back to the culture.
Speak on it? Culture.
Yeah, that's back to the culture, and that's back to my niece who made that racial comment. She didn't even understand that she was making it. It is endemic in the culture to be angry at the white people. It's also endemic in the culture to recognize it's my tribe. My tribe, and we are being held down, we're being held back, we're being not given our fair share, etc. And so it's a way of banding together.
Okay.
You know, the combination of that. So it's a way of thinking. And I want to come back to your comment a second ago about what's going on and where does this culture come from? Because you said the guy who's staying in the neighborhood doesn't get out. Well, let's take a look at that neighborhood. And it plays back to my comment about the 50 Shades of Grey. The more educated the person, the more engaged in the white community, etc., even just if it's at the workplace. Well, we come back to the fatherless environment. You go back into the 1950s and 1960s, welfare was becoming a thing back then, becoming more and more accepted. But our laws said that if there's a man in the house, you cannot receive welfare. If you're a single woman, with or without children, you can get assistance. If you're a single man, you cannot get assistance. Now that wasn't racial, it was underneath it was racial.
By gender.
By gender.
And you could be white and qualify for welfare.
Yes, absolutely.
Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So it was across the board.
It was across the board. However, we're in the trying to be fair here, Paul.
Okay, please.
Let's look at who was unemployed and who was employed in the 50s and the 60s, who was not necessarily always married, the legal structure, what have you. That would skew into the black neighborhood.
Now I'm going to pipe up.
Yeah.
I would say that in the 50s and the 60s, it was tougher for a black person to get a job.
No doubt about it.
Right?
No doubt about it.
There was school segregation. There were separate water fountains.
Yes.
The N-word was tossed around like crackers.
Yes, yes.
It was an epidemic.
Yep.
Okay?
Yes.
That's why I was saying, and I don't want to take away, and you can, by all means, please go right back to what you were saying, but I have to inject. That's why I thought in those 25 years since then, where we had taken strides. I remember in school being taught that about racism and about how we're equal. I was being indoctrinated as a white kid at an all-white school. We had one black kid, and that was wrong. It was not right, and we all carried that out. Of all the people that I've grown up with, I've never known anybody that I could say is racist against black people. Now, I've heard it. I've been in the locker room. I've been in the bars. I've been with my father-in-law, ex-father-in-law in the South, he's a good old boy, if you know what I mean.
I do.
All right,
Yeah.
so that got tossed out all the time. So, yeah, they're there. But
You answered your own question. I don't think you realize it.
all right, help me out.
All right.
So
You
I'm
said
old and feeble.
Yeah, right. That's why you've got all the followers on YouTube. Okay. No, you answered your own question. Here's, and it ties exactly into what I was saying. And that is, you went to a school where there was one black kid. I went to a school when I was in the 3rd grade where there was one black kid. His name was Johnny. Everybody liked him.
Right.
He was an athlete, and everybody wanted him on our team for kickball.
Right.
You know, because and he was just gregarious and funny, and I mean, he was the most popular kid in school. That was the culture that you experienced as a kid, and as I experienced in those predominantly white schools. And I went to 18 schools, K through 12, so I went to all different levels of schools. In the white schools, you were taught racism is bad. You were taught all of that. In the black schools, you were not taught that at all.
Is that interesting?
Yes. See, that wasn't part of the teaching. The part of the teaching there was the flip side, not that racism is okay, but that slavery, we had been held down, and this is what's the problem, and you'll never make it if you don't do these things. You got to get educated. There was a whole different story going on for the black people growing up, trying to get out of that. So the culture that these young men grew up in is very different than the culture that you or I grew up in the white side of the fence, especially the middle-class white kid.
Right.
So in 1980, when we thought it was kumbaya, I got married in 1981 to a black woman. I was right there with you.
Right.
I wanted that, and I was willing to put the rest of my life into that place.
Right.
Live by my beliefs, by my values.
Did you take any heat from white people when you showed up with your black wife?
Rarely.
Yeah.
Rarely.
But you got a lot of heat from black people.
Actively.
And your wife did too.
Yes.
Actively. And what did you and your wife do as far as discussing this dynamic? I mean, when you guys were at the breakfast table or dinner table or whatever, did this topic come up about it? And how did you two, function or deal with it or rationalize it?
Well, ultimately, because my mother told me back when, she says, you marry a black woman, it's going to do one or two things. It's going to drive you apart or drive you together.
Good point. Yeah, smart mother.
Yeah, so we worked on building that relationship, that strength between us, and eventually, over the years, it just became onerous. And even no matter that we loved each other, no matter that we supported each other, I helped her in business, I got her through school, what have you, and I'm not saying that lightly. I actually helped her with her homework and did that kind of stuff to get her through her bachelor's. I was already college educated, and eventually, in 2005, we said, you know what, we can't do this. Let's leave the country and go someplace where we're foreign, not black or white.
Interesting.
So we moved to Vietnam in 2005. We stayed there for 11 years, between Vietnam and Thailand.
Mm-hmm. Did it improve? Did the dynamic change?
It took the pressure off of us.
It did.
Yes.
It did.
Yeah.
So the pressure in America was on.
Absolutely.
The minute you bailed out, it was off.
That pressure was gone. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
fascinating. So, in conclusion on this.
Yeah, because this could go on for hours.
Yeah, we could. I'd love to do this for another 2 hours, but
Yeah, of course.
What is your take on the future? Here's what I've taken away from this, is that both black and whites, as they become two things, more educated, number one, and number two, more engaged with each other, there's less racism. Would you agree? Is that
absolutely?
Am I picking up on that?
You nailed it.
So if I was to hang out, if right now you were a black guy and you and me were drinking a beer or a cup of coffee or talking about weight loss or whatever the things that you and I are interested in, there wouldn't be this tension.
No.
Okay?
No.
Also, if we had engaged and tried to better ourselves via education or at least reading books and elevating our status and maybe trying to just get ahead, not necessarily financially, but in our own personal lives, become better people, what way that would happen.
Yes.
So it sounds to me that, and I see this in the white guys that are racist, isolation. And they are surrounded by each other and the hills of wherever, and they're all talking about that the black guy is the problem, and they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and then the same dynamic you're telling me, or I'm hearing from you, is that the black families or culture is systemically just with each other and not engaging. It sounds to me that, I don't want to use the word cure, but maybe a possible solution is if people just gave each other a chance and gave an opportunity to get to know someone from a different background, from a different culture. It's been out here in the Philippines, it's saved my life by getting to know the Filipino culture. I don't know about, you've only been here a week, so I don't think you can make that statement. But after 6 years, I feel younger, I feel better, because I've been exposed to something that I normally wouldn't have been. Do you have hope for the future as far as this dynamic that exists? I'm seeing it got stoked. We don't want to get into the politics of that, even though you and I personally brushed on it. But do you see that and I would love if anybody is a black man or woman watching this right now, if you've hung in there with us this long, and have an opinion or an opposing opinion, love to have you on the channel. Let me put that out there right away. In fact, I'll probably put it out in my little intro video that I'm going to do. I would love to hear about it. But where do you see us in 10 years? Can you make that prediction? Or is
I can.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's hear it.
I'm going to talk about the culture, but I'm going to preface this with the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
I gotcha.
Okay?
I like that.
So what's going to make the enemy of my enemy, what's that going to be in the American culture? Now, I know this is going to seem that I'm coming out of left field. Let's understand that the lower SES, socioeconomic status, black culture, is where the hate lives.
Okay.
And that's where the young men are kicked out and the young women are moving up.
Okay.
And the young men are drinking and doing, they're not living well. They're losing in this race. And so they're talking to hate. They're doing that. And so the 15-year-old is telling the 14-year-old who's telling the 13-year-old on down the line. So the 6-year-old is already believing in the hate, especially on the male side. So what's going to make those guys want to do what you're saying? Because theoretically, philosophically, you're 100% right. Realistically, that's never going to happen without some major push. So what's that push going to happen? So that people will spend some time together, etc.
Yeah.
Well, in America, right now, there is no cultural imperative. The only thing I can see, Paul, and I know this touches into an extremely different world, is in the world of economics. Globalism is dying, and that's not a political statement, that's a economic, environmental thing. Globalism is dying. The population is shrinking in most countries around the world. Africa's not one, Philippines is growing, but mostly it's shrinking. So when we don't have enough people to fill the jobs, when we don't have enough money to have jobs. So if we go into the trickle-down process with globalism, there's going to be a period of time, I believe, that there will be a period of time where things will get tough. And so the enemy of my enemy is a depression. The enemy of my enemy is extremely difficult times.
We're in this boat together.
And so if there's an answer to this, it'll be when either I'm working with a black guy or 5 black guys and we're all together, and if we don't do our job, we're fired, and there's 25 guys waiting to get each one of our spots, so we got to stay together.
Yeah.
When that happens, or when the whole situation breaks down so that we're all broke together somehow, this kind of an environment is the only place where the American culture has the opportunity to integrate.
Copy.
Otherwise, cultures shift slowly. So we're looking at 50, 60, 70 years before this anger that we have today burns out.
Yeah.
That's my opinion of it. Now, on the one hand, I'm dreading not the reversal of globalism, but I'm dreading the potential, even probability of a global depression.
Pain.
The pain, extreme pain. And globalism and global depressions are two separate issues, but they are hand in glove. And if that occurs, which I believe it will, whole nother topic, obviously, I think that America will be, first of all, it'll come out fine, but it's going to take a couple of decades to come out fine. And I think that we have an opportunity there, not that we're going to take advantage of it, but we have an opportunity there to say, you know what, you and I need this job more than I need to hate you or you need to hate me.
A common enemy.
A common enemy. And that will be depression.
I guarantee you this. I can guarantee you very little things in life. But I guarantee you this. If the spaceship was coming and hovering over us, and it was going to be the end of the earth unless we got our shit together and got rid of that spaceship.
That's right.
Wouldn't matter where you came from, what language you spoke. It doesn't matter.
We're all
together.
Yeah.
We got bigger and better things to do. We got other fish to fry. Well, kids, I want to thank you. If you did hang in there with us, we went for 49 minutes, and by the time I add to this, it'll be almost an hour. This is a discussion I've been wanting to have. I think that we can do a follow-up video. And depending upon your reaction to it, I don't filter my comments. Feel free to make them. I'll reiterate that if you would like to be on the channel with maybe an opposing view, you're more than welcome to do it. So, sir.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being with me. We'll see you in the next video.
Bye now.